We're in for another treat now. This project we're about to hear from in Donegal, in the amazing town of Ramelton, is an excellent example of the Heritage Officer, Dr. Joe Gallagher, and the Conservation Officer, Collette Beattie, working hand in hand and building upon the work that they achieved in Letterkenny last year. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Joe and Collette. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian, for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak today about our experience in Ramelton with the Historic Towns Initiative. In terms of our presentation, we just thought we'd give you a brief introduction to Ramelton itself, and then give you some advice in terms of getting started with your Historic Towns Initiative based on our own experience. Collette will give you an overview of the conservation works, and then we'll talk about some of the lessons that we learned. So welcome to fabulous Ramelton, the best wee tune in the world, as it says. This is a sign outside town hinting at its plantation origins. And the town itself is home to McDade's football special, but also to much fine Georgian architecture. Ramelton is a heritage town designated by Donegal County Council in 2000 as such. It's also a historic town protected under the National Monuments Act. It has 40 protected structures in town and 115 structures that are included on the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. There are 8 recorded monuments in town, again alluding to its archaeological significance. It's located along the River Lennon, along the Wild Atlantic Way, and in our county development plan is designated as a Layer 2 strategic town with a special economic and tourism function. And the future development should be informed by the built heritage to protect its unique historic character. In terms of advice in getting started, it's very important to establish your Historic Towns Initiative partnership team. In Donegal, that consisted of our Conservation Officer, myself as Heritage Officer, an Administrative Officer in Donegal County Council, and the Ramelton Georgian Society. And you can see here the Georgian House on the Brae in Ramelton, which was part of the HTI works, which was in the guardianship of the Ramelton Georgian Society. And Joe Burney and Jean Winston, I would like to single out them specifically in terms of the work that they did, in terms of garnering community support and putting us in contact with the key drivers and property owners in the town itself. They were absolutely fabulous to work with. The other important element of the team was Duncan McLaren, our conservation architect, who was employed through the Ramelton Georgian Society to put together the programs of works, which we did in advance of our application. So engaging with local communities and securing commitments from participation from the property owners was very, very important. So we had many meetings collectively and individually with property owners and with community groups, seeking their support and explaining the purpose of our project. It was also very important to identify a clear and costed programme of conservation works. And our conservation architect, based on the conservation report that we had for Ramelton, put together a programme of works based on priorities that we identified in Donegal County Council in consultation with the Ramelton Georgian Society and the property owners involved. As you know, the Historic Towns Initiative is very much a conservation-led initiative. So we had our conservation plan in place since 2018. We also had a Ramelton Action Plan that was published in January of 2020, which was very timely and highlighted some of the priorities for the initiative. We also had done things like the Ramelton Audio Heritage Tour a number of years ago, which was funded under our County Heritage Plan. And the House on the Brae, the Georgian House on the Brae, which was in the guardianship of the Ramelton Georgian Society, as I said. And that was very much a focus for community initiatives over the years, but had fallen into a state of disrepair. So this is the extent of our project here. It focused mainly on a number of properties here along Castle Street, highlighted in black, here around the Market Cross, and then the House on the Brae here on Bridge Street. And here to the north, you can see the River Lennon, which Castle Street parallels. What you'll notice here is that all of the buildings that were the subject of the Historic Towns Initiative were on the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, and several of them were protected structures. Further advice in terms of getting started is to start the works as soon as possible and maintain momentum. The time is short. You will get approval for your project in March, and the works have to be completed by early November. And the drawdown has to be completed, obviously, in early November as well. Again, we would suggest, as we have in the past, that maybe consideration be given to multi-annual budgets because of the very tight timeframes involved, and also challenges such as COVID and what have you. COVID did present challenges, as Siobhan highlighted, in terms of supply chains, in terms of the stop-start nature of the construction industry, and even things like bank payments and so on, because people couldn't actually go physically into the bank. That had to be done remotely as well. Early engagement with key stakeholders is strongly advised. Here you can see a slide looking down Castle Street, and one of the things that we had to do was a road closure. And again, we had to liaise with the property owners, and we had to liaise with the businesses in town in relation to that, no more so than along with our Roads and Transportation Directorate to get that arranged. We also had to liaise with our planning authority in relation to planning permission that might be required for some of the works, and that was required in a couple of instances in terms of the 14 buildings that were the subject of the Historic Towns Initiative in Ramelton. Early engagement as well is very important with ESB, because you're working at a streetscape level. In order for scaffolding to be erected and for works to begin, there has to be a safe working environment, and the ESB have to secure power lines and what have you. And again, they work very much to their own timetable. It can take several weeks to get that arranged. And again, it's very important to do that early, and that was one of the first things that we did in terms of our Historic Towns Initiative, was to liaise with them. Sometimes there can be costs involved as well, so it's important to liaise at an early stage. As I mentioned, there was some disruption to traffic in town, so again, liaising with businesses and liaising with property owners was very important to keep them on board and keep them informed of what was happening. And this idea of bringing the community along with you is absolutely vital. And again, it means a lot of communication and regular communication between the project partners, the participants, and indeed the wider community. As Siobhan indicated in her presentation, one of the things that you will have to decide, I suppose, is how you're going to arrange for payments to be made. In our instance, which worked quite well both in Letterkenny and in Ramelton this past year, was that we set up a residents association as a means for securing payments for the works themselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. This is Ramelton Town Hall, where we met at socially distanced in order to get agreements signed. Because we established the Ramelton Historic Towns Initiative Residents Association, which was made up of all the property owners participating in the Historic Towns Initiative. We established that as a legal entity. They opened their own bank account, collective bank account, and each of the individual residents signed that legal agreement with Donegal County Council, the first page of which you can see there on the left. And then the residents themselves, they commissioned conservation works with the contractors themselves directly, and also under the supervision of our conservation architect. So once we got approval for the scheme, and once we were successful in our application, because we'd already decided on what works were going to be part of the project itself, prior to our application, the owners were aware of their 20% commitment in terms of funding to the project itself. They knew the extent of the works, and we were able to tender and commission the contractors to undertake the works. And because there was 14 buildings and because time was short, we divided the building contracts into 4 packages. And so we had 4 sets of contractors working on 4 different packages of works simultaneously. So now Collette will give you an overview of the conservation works that were undertaken as part of our project.
Yeah, I will just take you through some of the properties in our project and give you an idea of how we prioritised our schedule of works, and hopefully it will help you put together your projects for this year. This slide here is one of the key buildings in our project. It commands a huge street frontage both onto the Market Cross area and onto Castle Street. It was identified as being at risk in the Ramelton Action Plan and the Conservation Plan. On the right-hand side of the main building there, the roof had completely collapsed through, taking with it the first floor and the ground floor, and all the debris was on the basement. So in terms of prioritising the works to this building, we re-roofed the building, repaired the chimneys, repaired the rainwater goods, and also we had to put in a first floor to tie the building together to ensure that it was structurally sound. The lower building there on the right-hand side of the building was also, it was almost ready just to completely fall through. Again, we re-roofed it, we lost a chimney during the works, fixed the rest of the chimneys, and then there was vandalism. As you can see from the first slide, all the windows were boarded over. They were damaged from the inside, but fortunately most of the historic fabric was able to be restored and only 2 new windows were required. We're really excited now about seeing this building repainted. I think that really will set it off, and they add the shop front back onto the 1970s part of the building on the right hand side. So all that detail will just set off this building for the community, and the community are really excited about it. So moving on down the street, down Castle Street, right next to the hotel, is this Georgian property here. The owner had started to had taken out the shop front about 12 years ago and taken off the render, and it had laid like this empty for almost 12 years. I suppose we wanted to prioritise here putting the render back, and we took a historic reference from old photographs and putting the historic shop front back into the building. And you can see here in this slide, after 3 coats of renders, beautifully ruled and lined, the historic shop front reinstated, it really does have a huge impact on the streetscape. And again, there's further works to be done when the weather gets a wee bit better in terms of painting and finishing off the shop front, and we're really excited to see the results. Moving on down the streetscape, we have this property here. It has been lying vacant now for decades when the last residents moved out. It was, in terms of prioritising the works for this, water was getting in, so we had to address that in terms of roof works, the chimneys, the rainwater goods. And also all the external joinery work needed repaired, and it needed a good clean as well, and a paint just to kind of lift it. So this is the roof works done, the joinery work done, and we will hopefully now in a couple of months' time have a painting scheme just to kind of lift the reveals and lift the doors, just to really contribute back to the vibrancy of the streetscape. And this property was really, really interesting because it has a beautiful Victorian shop front in it, and we're working with the owners now to kind of find the right tenant for the property. It was somebody living over the shop, maybe an artist, and they could have this shop then as their craft shop. This area used to have 16, this used to be the main commercial area of Ramelton, and it has moved then down towards the east end of the town. It used to have 16 businesses, and it'd be lovely to see the vibrancy and businesses returning to this area. This was a property just across the street. It's 3 very small residential properties, and they have no outdoor space at all. The owner was at a loss what to do with these properties, and they have laid vacant for decades as well. So we took a different approach in this one and trying to really think about a new use for the building, and worked with the owners and the conservation architect to draw up a scheme and get it through planning. And basically, the scheme was to the first 2 buildings would be combined, and then the last building then would be a winter garden. So that would be the space, their outdoor space for storage of bins, etc. So you can see the extensive before and after photographs. You know, in terms of priorities, we had a re-roof, do the chimneys, we had a re-render, and once there was boards on all the windows, and there was lovely historic joinery that we were able to bring back. This is a photograph here of the winter garden. So this will be their outdoor space, and it's just a really creative way of developing this property. And this plan gives you an idea of this will be a fantastic home for someone, and the owners now are moving ahead and kind of renovating the building now after the works have been completed. And if you just go on to the next slide there, it kind of shows the before and after. This is a huge visual effect on the streetscape, and this is before and this is the after. And I think that the residents are just so excited seeing this property restored back, because they lost all hope for it, and it just shows you with a bit of thought that any property can be brought back again. So just moving up the streetscape, this was kind of a low cost budget restoration project. Here we prioritised the impact on the streetscape. They had PVC windows, replaced them with timber sash windows, restored the shop, gave it a paint job, and it has had an absolutely fantastic visual effect on the streetscape, and the owner is absolutely delighted, as are the neighbours. Moving up to the Market Cross area, this is one of the oldest properties within Ramelton. So although it didn't look too bad, we felt it did deserve some attention. It had PVC windows and maybe an inappropriate shop front. So we set about some roof repairs, chimney works. We put back in, we got reference from old historic photographs, and we put back in the sliding timber sash windows and designed an appropriate shop front for this building. It is not completed yet. We are really looking forward now to seeing the paint scheme and the hand painted signage put on the building. But it's just really lifted the whole streetscape of the Market Cross area. And lastly, this is the Ramelton Georgian Society building, the house in the Bray. This building was in really, really bad state of repair. It is again lying vacant for decades. The water was pouring in through the roof, through the roof lights and the chimneys. So this all had to be, the whole roof had to be reslated. The chimneys had to be repaired, new rainwater goods, and all the external joinery all had to be restored. And you can see from this final figure, we're absolutely delighted with the results. We're now working with the Georgian Society now to find a new use for the building, because the key thing is, as after all this work now, buildings are secure, they're dry, and we're working now on finding new uses. So I'll just hand you back over to Joe now to take you through our last part of our presentation, which is the lessons learned. Thank you.
Thanks, Collette. Yeah, as you can see there, in terms of the extent of the works, there was a need for strong conservation supervision, and I think we had that in our conservation architect and also the conservation officer and myself as heritage officer in terms of overseeing the works themselves. And that was quite important too when it came to the path of payment that we chose. The conservation architect certified the works that took place. The invoices were issued by the building contractor to the owners based on that certification. We then, as heritage officer and conservation officer, undertook site visits to verify the works that had been certified. The bills submitted by the Residents Association were submitted by the Residents Association to Donegal County Council, and then we were able to release partial payment of our grant to the Residents Association, and subsequently then the Residents Association paid the building contractors. So that was the path of payment that we chose, and it also meant that the property owners themselves didn't have to take out bridging loans because the works were certified, because they were verified, and because the grant could be released to the Residents Association. It meant that payments could be made, phased payments could be made on a prompt basis. So again, we would suggest that maybe you consider that as part of your project as well. Just to bear in mind in terms of costings as well, the 10% of the overall cost of the project is retained as retention costs, and that reduces to 5% once the works are practically complete. But remember, it's a period of 6 months before the defects liability period runs out, when the retention reduces to 0. So again, it may be, you may need to bear in mind in terms of the costing of your project that you may need to allow for that. The project itself, the initiative, the Historic Towns Initiative, presents opportunities for economies of scale as well. When the scaffolding was up, some of the property owners undertook additional works because again, they didn't have to invest additional costs in terms of scaffolding. So it was a good opportunity to get some additional works done, and some property owners availed of that opportunity. We'd like to say a word of thanks, obviously, to the Heritage Council and to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage for their support for the Historic Towns Initiative in Ramelton. It has made a wonderful impact at streetscape level on the 14 buildings that were involved. It's also helped to engage and coalesce the community around the project itself. And I think that it's something, once now the spring arrives and once we get the painting scheme done, that will make a very, very significant impact on the town itself. And just in relation to our previous Historic Towns Initiative in Letterkenny in 2019, in February of last year, in February of 2020, when we were still able to socially gather, we were very pleased that our Church Lane Historic Towns Initiative won the Irish Planning Institute President's Award for Highly Commended Project as part of the Irish Planning Awards 2020. And this is us in Dublin at that ceremony, along with members of the Church Lane Residents Association and Duncan McLaren, our conservation architect. Finally, this is a sign from Stuart's shop that Collette showed you earlier. It's a sign that says "Headaches go when you take Aspro." And certainly when working on a Historic Towns Initiative, there will be many challenges, so do keep the Aspro close to hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Collette. I think that was superb, and a lot of the comments in the chat column are incredibly positive.